First thing I want to talk about lessons learned is fear. Fear controls us. It can control us, right? Fear comes to us so many times. There's nobody who gets through this world without experiencing fear, and there's nobody who gets through without experiencing tragedy and injustice. In 1997, a guy named Pope John Paul stood up in front of the Polish people. Many of them were from the Gdansk shipyard who had been fighting for a thing called solidarity. This was the right for Poles to unionize in the shipyard, which the USSR controlled country at that time was a Warsaw Pact country. They couldn't have union. They couldn't have representation over their labor. They were also suppressed in terms of worshiping, right? So they couldn't worship freely. And this is a Polish Pope who knew these folks, and he came and said the words that they needed to hear the most: be not afraid, be not afraid. And those three words led to folks standing up and saying, you know what, I've lived in fear so long, I'm tired of doing it. I'm going to put this down and be who I can be. And I can't change the world maybe, but I'm going to decide how I'm going to react to it, right? And I'm not going to live in fear. I'm not going to give others who can do bad things to me, but I'm still not going to give them that control over me, right? And I thought that was a tremendous, tremendous lesson. It's one that I've tried to learn, and I think I've done better at, but it's one that we all have to keep learning, right? There's this guy, Frank Herbert, a writer, and he wrote in his most famous work that fear is the mind killer, and it's fear that stops us and limits us. Fear activates the amygdala, which is that kind of part of your brain, that fight or flight part, right? That we've all known that adrenaline that hits you, you start to get, shaky and all that. It's because our brains don't know the difference between real danger and what we tell ourselves is upsetting, right? Our bodies react the same way, right? And so we have to learn, if somebody does something dumb at work and you get so mad, right? Or says something stupid in the, on Facebook or whatever it might be. There's so much of that you have to stop yourself and control your own reaction to that. And you have to recognize your body's acting the way it has because your body's built that way. And that's been a real good survival tool for thousands of years, right? Tens of thousands of years. That's worked out because usually it meant the bear was coming or something was happening that you had to react to, right? But it's not always that way. In fact, usually in today's world, it's not life or death, right? Usually it's your response. It doesn't equal the situation, right? And so my message on that is just you have to see the fear, recognize your reaction to it, but then let it go, right? You got to ask yourself, is somebody trying to kill me or not? Because if they're not, maybe I'm just mad because this guy did something. Now I got to work through the weekend or something. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it's not worth giving that kind of response to, because that response eats you up, right? It creates just a pool of negativity in your body and your mind. If you don't control it, if you don't let it flow through you and release that and channel that, it can eat you up and prevent you from living your life the way you could be, right? So, here's a more modern example of, Star Wars, right? The Jedis have to control their fear. Why is that so important? Why do they talk about it? Because this is a common thing. We all feel this stuff, right? We all have to learn to control our fear, whether we admit to others we have it or not. We do. I do, right? And we have to learn to control it. And we have to recognize that and de-escalate that emotional response we have in order to reframe a situation. And I find, by the way, the best technique is just to sleep on it. Like, I'm so upset right now, I'm not going to do anything about it. That's my new response. I've probably learned that the last 10, 15 years, because I used to, oh man, I got to fix this right now. And I'd go running after somebody and it never worked out, right? Now, if I sleep on it next day, it's not half as bad as I thought it was, right? It just isn't. And so I've found that it's helpful just to relax a little bit. And if there's one thing I could say to everybody here, in hindsight, even the very worst things that's ever happened to me, when my brother died, when my uncle was killed, when my marriage fell apart, when I lost my job, all the things that are the worst, when my wife and I lost our baby too, like you did, Todd, it was terrible. And there were holes I got into so big and so deep that I thought I could never get out of them, but I did, right? And so one of the things you have to learn is it's going to get better. And don't assume that your feelings, you can't trust your emotions, right? Your emotions come and go, right? Your body has that reaction. You get that response and all. I wish I could go back and learn that lesson sooner in my life, because I think I could have done more, right? I think I could have been happier. I think I could have helped people a little bit more if I let go of that sooner, right? And it's just, you know, there's miraculous things that happen that people say, well, I wish I knew what the future is. And I say, not me, man, because there's things that are going to happen that aren't good, right? But the other hand is there's things that are miraculous and amazing and wonderful that happen too, you know? So if there's one thing I would say is, don't worry, it's going to work out. Don't trust your emotion today. If it's a negative emotion, don't trust that. Think your way through it and work your way out of it, right? It'll all be fine in the end. And if it's not fine, then it's not the end, right? Here's my next guy. Anybody know who this is? I don't know, you know, I got some old, you know, references here. So Be Here Now. First of all, Be Here Now was a book written by this guy, Ram Dass. He was a Harvard guy hanging around with Timothy Leary in the 60s. And they both dropped out, you know, and he wrote this book. He kind of went into Eastern spirituality, and he came up with this book called Be Here Now. I read the book. I can't tell you anything that was in the book, but I learned one thing, and it's the title, Be Here Now. The whole book was about not trying to live in the future. You can't live in the future. The only future we have is distant, right? The future's always out there. What we have now is today, present, right? So live today, right? And the reason I put Captain Sisko up here is I'm a Star Trek fan, right? So if you look at like the first episode of Deep Space Nine, it starts with him fleeing a battle and his wife gets killed, right? And then he can't let go of that, right? The whole first season, they keep coming back to that he can't let go of this terrible thing that happened. And he keeps reliving that moment. And then finally he, you know, these Star Trek, you know, nice science fiction stuff, he meets this alien who can see into his mind. And he says, why do you live in that moment? Why are you living here? Why would you choose to live in this moment? Right? You have a son, you have a life, you have other things that are there, but you keep living here. And that makes him a tragic person because he can't let go of this, of course, terrible thing. But, you know, you get to choose where you live, or you should be conscious of where you live, right? And my point is to try to live in the present and see what's good today. So plan for the future, but live now, appreciate the good things that are happening now. You know, Todd, I'm not even sure if you know all this, but when I met you, I had lost my job. I had to deplete all my savings, right, to keep living in our home, right? Yeah. It was a tough time, you know. No one would hire me because at that time, the healthcare reform thing was just like being talked about and coming in, and no one wanted to hire anybody because they didn't know if they're going to have to lay people off or what to do. So they're all like, well, Bill, we're not hiring anybody. It's a hiring freeze, you know, for about 2 years. And that is not good when you got, you know, mouths to feed, right? So it was a tough time. And I ended up having to, well, I guess I didn't have to, but I chose to totally change what I did and who I was, right? So I went from executive vice president to an individual contributor, business analyst, right? Working on a project with people half my age. And I was making at that time about 20% of what I'd been making before, right? 20%. So it was a 80% cut, right? And you get used to certain levels, right? Of money coming in, that money just goes right out and you're living at that level. And all of a sudden, not happening, right? So no more restaurants, no more this and that, no more vacations, no more this and that. But, you know, so it was a hard time in some ways. But, you know, I had a 1-year-old child. I had a daughter who was about 6 at that time. And I'll tell you what, when I look back at that now, if I just had known not to worry, I mean, I told this to you before, I'd give $1,000 to any person that could put me back for one day in that life, knowing what I know now, so that I could just focus more on my kids and my wife and enjoy that day, because there were beautiful times we had, beautiful times, you know. And now that I look back on it, that's mostly what I remember, you know, all the good things. So define who you are. So define who you are is all about your life's a story, but you get to write it, right? You know, a lot of people, oh, this happened to me and this happened to me and this happened. It's like, dude, that's someone else's story about you, right? What's your story about you? What do you want it to be? And if you haven't thought about it, you should, right? And write it down. This picture is not like a stock photo. This is my folder from today. You know, this is, I keep this every day with me, right? Here it is. I keep it every day. I have had it for years and years, right? This might be something you didn't know either, Todd. You know, I write out my pyramid of who I want to be and what's going to happen to me. You know, this particular one I wrote some years ago, and I kept changing it. Then it kind of solidified and it's kind of stayed the same for a while. But I can tell you this, when I started this thing, none of this was true. And now most of it's already happened. I mean, it's just a matter of, if you're conscious and intentional, if you say what you want, and if you think about that, you know, it'll happen. Because, you know, think about the things in this world that man's created, right? There's nothing that man has created that didn't start in his head first, right? Everything that we have made, everything in our world existed in our minds first, right? So doesn't it make sense to start thinking with your mind about what your story's going to be and what you want it to be, and then write it down and be conscious about it? You know, you hear about sleepwalkers, you know, sleepwalkers in life. People just kind of bounce, and they're like, I always think of it like a pinball machine where that ball comes down and then something hits them and they bounce over that way and hit them that way. And sometimes that happens to all of us because there's stuff we can't expect, right? Like what, you know, pandemic and what's happening now, it's not what we expected. But we get to choose how we react to these things. We get to decide what we're going to do about it, right? And we get to design our own story, write our own story. I would say for me, it's meant a lot. I'll also mention, you know, I got a couple of love notes there from my son and my wife, and I like that. You know, it just keeps me motivated. Anytime I'm having a bad day, open that up, look at it, and say, it's not that bad, is it? You know, it really isn't. And so far, it never has been. The next thing I want to talk about is just doing the right thing, right? You know, I put this Western picture up because in the Western movies, it's always a tough guy and he's going to do the right thing. There's Clint Eastwood back there. You know, Clint's going to do the right thing, right? And it's all going to work out okay, right? But in real life, it doesn't work that way. Number one, sometimes bad things happen to good people, right? And sometimes when you do the right things, you get in trouble for it. It's not always fair and just what happens, right? So in the real world, people aren't watching all the time either when it's the right thing. You know, when you're in an executive's office and he's telling you to fire somebody because he didn't like them, you know, or for the wrong reasons, you got a choice right then and there. Are you going to say what's right, or are you going to let that go and be part of the problem, right? Are you going to make a stand when it counts? You know, hey, when everybody's saying this is wrong, we got to get this guy and all that stuff, that's easy to rate that. You're just joining in what's already been happening. The hard part, it was when everybody's saying one thing and you say, but you're all wrong. And I have another message for you, right? So this is a quote. I thought Margaret Mead said this, but I might be wrong. Some people say that no one person can change the world. I say that's the only thing that ever has. You know, it's scary when you look at people that have actually changed the world. You think of them as better than you, bigger than you, and in some ways, it's amazing. It's just amazing. But in the end, you know, what did they have? They had courage. They had that firmness of knowing what's right. I was talking to Todd, and he said, Bill, you know, I said, I want to make sure I do a good job here. He said, Bill, what's right is still right, you know? So, and then, yes, do the right thing. That's Spike Lee, right? That's another. I get most of my stuff from movies, by the way. All right. So the next thing I want to show you something really old and ancient that's really going to date me. I don't even know. I think Mr. Hunt would know what this is. That's a tape cassette recorder. Oh, man. I had one just like that. That's exactly. Mine was a Radio Shack. That's a Panasonic. And you know why I put it there? It's because a tape recorder is a machine where you can speak into it and then you can play back what you said, right? The thing is, your brain works kind of on the same principle. Your brain doesn't know what's going on except for what, your eyes tell it, your ears tell your brain what's going on, right? You got these ways of communicating with your brain, right? Well, if you say things out loud, your brain doesn't know who's talking. It's just, okay, I just heard that, right? If you tell yourself negative things, your brain's going to go, that's right. That's right. If you tell yourself positive things, your brain will also react. This is more sophisticated way. It's called NLP, or neuro linguistic programming, right? This is when you decide to tell yourself things that are helpful to you. It's like putting junk food versus good food in your brain. If you just sit and let the world flow in, and you got that, screen up on your face and watching all that junk coming through, you're feeding yourself junk food, right? And your brain's going to absorb that and get fat, right? It's not going to be what it could be, right? If you're trying to use your brain like a muscle and be grateful, look at the situation, look at what you can control, which is yourself, your own reaction to things, your own leadership in the world as a human being. And I'm not talking about position. I'm talking about as a human. We all lead, everything we do is watched, right? And I'll talk about leadership in a second, but, be grateful. Practice being grateful, because it's healthy for you to do that. It's healthy for you to think about what's right and appreciate what you have. There's always somebody who's getting paid more. There's always somebody who's getting paid less. There's a million reasons to look at everybody else and covet, those things. And none of that helps you one darn bit. None of that's useful. It's a waste. It is a negative. You're feeding yourself negative food in your brain, right? So my message here is take that tape recorder and make a tape you want to make, right? Tell yourself the message you want to hear that will help you. I'm not talking about lying to yourself. See, I'm not saying just hypnotize yourself into some false, I'm Superman, I'm going to fly now. Out the window you go. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying take your mission take that story about yourself, what you want to be, and say, today I did these things that are going to help me do that. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this, that, and the other thing. Every night my evening prayer starts with what I'm grateful for from that day. And I've never failed since I started that practice. I've never had this. I've always, maybe it's just the way the sun looked on that leaf, or maybe it was my wife said something, sweet, or that I'm just grateful that she's there still after all these years. Lord knows why. But I've never failed to be able to say, thank you, Lord, for this, this, and the other thing, right? And I think that's important, because we need to count those blessings, because those other things, we hyper focus on the things we don't like, right? But we forget about the things that are good, that are there until they're not, right? So appreciate them while you're there and while they're in front of you. All right, here's a good one. This is a hard one. This is probably my hardest one. Be the change you want to see. You guys know who this is. This is Mohandas Gandhi, of course. Here's what's interesting. You see the kind of shawl thing he's wearing? He made that. He wove that himself. He took and made the thread and spun it on a little home loom, and he wove that thing and made those clothes. This is a guy who was a Brahmin. He was the highest caste in India. He was a lawyer. He was well educated. He had money. He had position. He had wealth, and he became that guy, right? The guy you're seeing, because he wanted the world to change. He wanted to free his people. He wanted to eliminate the caste system, and he wanted to do it in a way that was not violent. And so he chose to really be an example, right? To lead. He centered himself so strongly. You guys know he was beaten. He was jailed. He was vilified. He went on hunger strikes to save other people that nearly killed him, made him into such a frail person that you see there. This is a guy, that's one of my heroes, right? So this is a guy that who lived, he walked his talk, right? In a big way, right? In a big way. And that just reminds me that your actions are the most powerful thing you can do. And everybody gets to lead from where they are, because we get to lead as what kind of human we are, right? I don't compare myself to him. That's an inspiration to me, So that really gets into the whole leadership thing, right? So I just put a couple thoughts down. The first thing I learned about leadership was in the military, and that was, you know, everybody's watching you, so you're always on, but then you should be the person. It shouldn't be that hard to know that everybody's watching you, because you should, you know, who are you? Once you decide who you are, be that person, right? And you can't lead if you can't follow. If you can't take an order, don't give one. And don't give an order you wouldn't follow, by the way. Don't ever ask somebody to do something that you wouldn't do. That's a terrible thing to do. And people will know immediately, right? In fact, lead from the front. Show them you'll do the hard stuff. Take on the hard jobs. A lot of times success for me has meant doing stuff everybody else said, man, that's a mess. I'm going to walk on by that flaming pile. I ain't touching that, right? And then, you know, I mean, the people that dealt with it, that's people that got stuff done. Not always rewarded for it, but they got stuff done. And that to me always mattered, making a difference, right? So, you know, take care of your people, make sure they're eating, make sure they're rested, make sure you're listening to them, you're helping them, be fair, be consistent. Thank people. I think that's, you know, it sounds so simple, but thank people in a way that is personal, that they know you meant it because you saw them do something. Todd, you're really good at that, you know, for example. Very good at that. Yeah, absolutely. And reward and recognize people based on the results they get for you, right? Based on what they do. Just set up what the expectation is and ask them to do it, and reward their delivery. Get a strong team together. I always try to get people that are better than me. Todd's a much better guy at a lot of that work we did together than I was, right? So, and I was like, good. That's good, right? Never bothered me. In fact, I enjoy that, right? I mean, the best thing you can do is get a great team and let them, give them the tools they need to succeed and let them at it, right? And then really, I mean, as a leader, my job always was, will this team perform better because I was here? And if not, or if someone else could get them to perform better, I need to step aside, right? That's the measure for me. And that's not on an appraisal. That's just how I measured it, right? And that comes to another point, you know, find out what you love about your job and let it shine. I knew, like my brother, you know, who's gone now, but he knew from when he was little what he wanted to do. That guy wanted to fly airplanes from when he knew what an airplane was. I think the first time he saw one in the sky, that's it. He was done. And I'm going to fly airplanes. And that guy knew what he was going to do his whole life. I didn't know what the crap I was going to do, right? I didn't know, right? And it bothered me, right? Like I would get interested in all kinds of things, and I'd be sort of good at a lot of stuff, but I didn't know the one thing I was good at, right? And then it took me years of working to realize the thing I was good at wasn't a particular industry. I wasn't born to do healthcare or born to do insurance. What I was born to do was make a difference, try to humanize the workplace, right? Try to make it a little better, you know, because I was there, try to lead teams. That's what I realized I was good at, right? And then when I finally realized that, I started to love it, right? Actually, I realized I loved that part of it. And then because I love that part of it, I stopped complaining about the other parts because they were just silly. They were just on the edges of it. The main thing I knew I was doing every day, I loved it, right? And so I'm a case of a guy who didn't know what he wanted to do, you know, fell into some stuff, and then took years to realize what I loved about it, you know? And as soon as that happened, I stopped griping about it. I don't complain about my job. I'm grateful for it, right? Ever since that, right? And part of it was recognizing that there was a pattern in my career. I would find assignments that fit my skills, right? Where I was needed, where there was a turnaround situation, or there was trouble, and the last guy had gotten fired, morale was bad, and I knew I could help morale, and I could get in there and get people to work with me. It's not a coincidence. I finally realized there's a pattern to this. I remember I was at one job, and I fixed everything. We were winning awards for service. Things were going great. And I'm like, what do I do now? I'm bored. I got to get out of here. I got to find another job. And then I realized, it's the first time I realized I do this to myself. I find these situations where I kill myself fixing them, right? Because I love it, right? I like that. It's hard, it's exhausting. And I love something that makes me use everything I have to make it better, right? So that's my story there. This picture I put in was it really refers to my early story. This is my old house in Virginia, the one that I lost all this money on. I lost my job, but I was in that house and had to reinvent myself. And it's a beautiful house, but you know, the happiness wasn't on the outside, it was on the inside, right? and it was how I looked at it, right? Another point I wanted to make is be a lifelong learner. I was asking earlier, what is this? What is this picture of, right? This picture is a taxi driver in New York around the turn of the last century, right? So it's 1890 something, and that's a cab, right? That's the original version of the cab. That's a taxi cab, a one-horse taxi cab with a taxi driver in the back. That's the taxi driver. Now, if that taxi driver said, my job is to ride people around the city in a horse and buggy, when the car came in 10 years later, he was out of a job. If he said, that's not my job is to get people around the city who are walking and who need to get places fast. And if I got a better way to do that, I'm going to do it. Well, that's the person who adapted, right? And who saw the value they created as opposed to the tools that they used. So don't get attached to a particular tool or technology, right? Certainly in my lifetime, that's changed completely, right? Several times, but I think that's fun, right? But that's the world. It's going to keep changing, right? So don't get attached to however you're doing it with, whatever you're doing it with. That's not who you are. That's not where you should live. Going back to that, right? Think about value creation. Think about what you're doing, and be curious and study and be a lifelong learner. Keep being a student. It's fun, right? It's fun to see what's coming next and to help it to happen. I have to say this for anybody who's, younger is start saving in your 20s, right? I did that and I lost it all. So I wish I had done that. No, I wish I'd held on to it. I started saving and I stopped because I got divorced. So I lost it all. But start saving, save early. If your company has a 401k, use it, because if you don't get that match, you're leaving money on the table, right? So use that, and you'll do yourself a favor. It'll make it a lot easier in later life as you start to look at retiring. Kind of the last thing I wanted to mention is about loyalty and people, right? Companies have changed, right? When I started in business, you could work at a company, get a retirement, and work there one company your whole year, and your whole career rather, and in fact, I remember my father telling me this, like he couldn't leave the company he was at because there was a kind of informal agreement by the other companies. They wouldn't hire from each other, so you're kind of stuck, right? There's a downside to that, right? So, you were just, that's your team. You picked your team, you got your shirt on, you're going to wear that shirt, or not be here at all, right? Well, now, it's changed, right? Companies don't have retirements. Companies don't see you as a lifelong employee. They, the gig economy has kind of come to the front. And so companies are not as loyal to people as maybe they once were. But when I look at that, I remember that, companies may not be loyal to you, but people can be, right? So you may not remember the details of any particular issue that you were working with, any particular business problem, but I'll bet you'll remember the special people, right? I'll bet you'll remember that, and that'll stay with you. And, your greatest legacy will be who you helped, right? I had the pleasure to come back to a company here in Florida, WellCare, that I had worked at before. And it was wonderful for me, for people who I had forgotten. I mean, it had been years I hadn't seen them, or I remember them, but I didn't remember I did anything, right? And they kept telling me the stories of things I had done that had stayed with them that they appreciated. And it meant the world to me to hear that. And I thought, well, that's great, because that's exactly who I want to be, and that's wonderful. And I never would have known that if I hadn't come back in that building, right? So that was kind of interesting experience to kind of come full circle on that. The greatest legacy you'll ever have is who you helped, right? And it starts with your own family and your own home. And no one on their deathbed ever said that they wish they'd spent more time at work, right? So, in this world, there's folks who tear things down, and there's folks who build things up, and there's folks who don't do anything, right? And the choice is really for you. When you think about what story you want to write, what story will that be? Are you going to be a builder or something else?